Action. Hi everyone, my name is Alec, and today I'm going to talk about one of the most polarizing guitar players in the history of heavy metal, Kirk Hammett. In my formative years of learning how to play the guitar, Kirk was a big inspiration to me, and throughout most of my first year of learning how to play guitar, I learned a lot of Kirk's solos. I was smitten by the pentatonic frenzy of Kirk's guitar stylings, and to this day I still consider Metallica to be one of my favorite bands. But along the way, I started listening to different guitar players that most people would consider to be better than Kirk Hammett. And also along the way, I discovered that Kirk has a lot of haters. Whether it's the never-ending wah jokes or people reminding you that he couldn't play that one riff in Some Kind of Monster. Kirk definitely takes his fair share of abuse. But is it justified? Today I will dive deep and take an objective and unbiased look into Metallica's discography to answer the ultimate question. Is Kirk Hammett good? Metallica's debut record, Kill 'Em All, is definitely their most raw and aggressive record, and Kirk's playing on this album is no different. While it is true that Dave Mustaine would lay the foundation for most of the lead guitar on Kill 'Em All, I do believe that Kirk does a good job of bringing Dave's ideas to life. Kill 'Em All was the record that started it all, and today I'm going to break down one of my favorite solos off of this record, Whiplash.
All right, so the first solo we're taking a look here is Whiplash. This is the live at the Metro in Chicago in 1983. A great example of an early Metallica bootleg. This first lick is very fast, a little difficult to play if you aren't used to using your pinky, but I think it's very appropriate for the energy of this song. Let's take a listen. I remember growing up trying to play this one. It was a little more challenging than some of the other licks on Kill 'Em All, but we've got a pentatonic repetition as our main idea. Let's take a listen to where he goes from here. So I really like the build with this open string lick. Kirk establishes a new theme and uses it sort of as a way to carry on through the build of the solo. As he ascends, the intrigue builds to where he's going next. We've got this lick just kind of keeps ascending to the point where we're totally locked in. He has the listener engaged, and we're trying to figure out where he's going to go with this. Let's check out where he goes next. All right, so this is kind of key to point out right here. Kirk does this a lot, kind of at every stage of his career, going back to Kill 'Em All, but he'll use B minor pentatonic and E minor pentatonic interchangeably. Right, so the one issue that I have with this is that with B minor pentatonic, we're missing a G note, which is the third when we're talking about E minor. Whiplash is in E minor, so because because Kirk is trying to play in B minor pentatonic, you sort of lose one of those definitive scale tones in G here. Every time I listen to Kirk do stuff like this, I sort of think that he was sitting there in studio playing something like... I sort of feel like he just was like, good enough. Let's see where he goes from here. So to me, this solo, as are a lot of the solos on Kill 'Em All, it's very much like Angus Young playing thrash metal, which I think is a very good thing. His leads sort of embody that same frenetic, alcohol-fueled aggression that's so indicative of Metallica in their early days.
Metallica's second record, Ride the Lightning, saw Kirk Hammett expand from the pentatonic frenzy of Kill 'Em All to a more dynamic and sophisticated guitar styling. Whether it's the blistering alternate-picked arpeggios from the album's title track, or the slow, somber intro from Fade to Black, this album contains some of the best solos of Kirk's entire career. Kirk's lessons with noted guitar virtuoso Joe Satriani was having a very positive effect on his technique, composition, and phrasing. One of the best examples of this is the solo in Creeping Death.
So here we have my favorite solo off of Ride the Lightning, Creeping Death from the Seattle 1989 show, probably the best Metallica show ever. The opening sequence is one of the harder licks in the Metallica catalog. I love how it starts during the tail end of this main riff prior to where James and the rest of the band switch to the riff in the solo. Let's check that out. That lick is really challenging, though. It's a great precedent for the rest of the solo. Let's check out the rest from this lick. This part here, really, really cool. Right, so this lick is a clear indication of Kirk's progression as a young player. With Kill 'Em All, Kirk used pretty much entirely pentatonic scales, almost 100% pentatonic for his leads. And while this is likely attributed to Dave Mustaine's blueprint on the No Life Till Leather demo, Kirk didn't do much to embellish the solos with the modal passages we see here. But essentially, this is sort of the growth in Kirk Hammett's young career, where we have a little bit of an implementation of different scales and sort of a willingness to expand outside of the confines of the pentatonic scale. Let's see where he goes after this. So here's Kirk establishing some new techniques. We've got, right, he's showing a willingness to expand his technical palette to sweep picking, something we do not see on Kill 'Em All. And then from there, we get to a very interesting lick. Let's check this out. So this is basically just a trill picked straight up the D string, going up chromatically. Like, I wouldn't choose to do that probably if I was writing this solo, but it's definitely very captivating. The first time you hear this when you're 11 years old, you're kind of like, what is that? Where's that coming from? And then it resolves really nicely to this F sharp minor pentatonic phrase that goes into probably my favorite part of the song. Let's check out where this goes. So this is definitely my favorite part in the solo. This solo demonstrates Kirk's ability to develop a melodic theme and build on it. It's really easy to lose sight of this as a guitar player. I think we take for granted that sometimes the most effective lead is the one that the listener is able to sing along to, whether they're able to sing along to it by themselves or in a crowd of 400,000 people. I think that this is something that we forget about sometimes as musicians in general. While I love a guitar player that demonstrates a fluent vocab of arpeggios and scales, and one that can play exotic leads over hip changes, I also love simplicity, things like this, where you can sort of play this back in your mental jukebox after the first time you listen to the song. I think this is an awesome example of that. Right? It's just the theme that keeps building and building and building until we reach the climax of the solo. Let's check that out. Kirk sort of runs up this like E minor scale. It's pretty straightforward. And then bends on the 22nd fret, a Kirk Hammett staple. But it adds a lot of finality to this solo, and it's a great way to end it before getting into the Die by My Hand riff that comes afterwards.
In my opinion, Master of Puppets is Metallica's best album. It's also Kirk's best album guitar-wise, and one of the best guitar albums in metal history. It's so good, in fact, that I couldn't narrow it down to one solo. I had to pick 3.
So here we have Welcome Home Sanitarium live in Philly from 1989. Let's check this one out. So this is like an awesome use of space, really throughout like the first solo in the song and this solo in particular. There are not a lot of examples throughout thrash metal amongst Kirk's contemporaries where guitar players do this. I feel like it's something that's missed a lot. Kirk does a really great job here of just holding back and exercising space when playing this solo. The second solo here in particular is a great example. Let's see where it goes after this. So obviously not the greatest quality in the world for this version of Sanitarium or this show, but I really do love his tone here. I think it sounds great in this live setting. And then this descending lick, there's one thing that I take umbrage with here. Let me show you what it is. Can you hear that? I'll play the lick and point it out to you. There is one note in particular that kind of bothers me. So a little background theory-wise on Sanitarium. The song's in E minor. So I think the solo is nearly perfect, but the biggest issue that I have is that there's this G sharp note, which sort of strays from the key, which I'm fine with outside playing and passing tones, but James is playing the G chord during this part, and it definitely clashes. It's a fleeting moment, but it clashes nonetheless. But like I said, aside from that one part, it's almost a perfect solo. Let's see where it goes after this. So the interval slides here. I love that. It really, to me, this lick brings about sort of the or it resonates with the lyrical perspective of the mental patients longing to be free from the oppression of the sanitarium. As profound and schmaltzy as that sounds, I think that this solo does an awesome job, this last lick here, of representing sort of the lyrical theme that we're dealing with. So the second solo I've chosen to highlight off of Master of Puppets is Leper Messiah. A lot of people think this solo is swept, but upon further review, the arpeggio sequence at the beginning of the solo is at least partially alternate picked. Let's check it out. So I'm not totally certain if that's all alternate picked or if it's like alternate picked on the high E and swept on the B and the G. It's either that or it's like straight up like Steve Moore style alternate pick. Very, very difficult. I've got to give Kirk a lot of credit for this one. If I had to choose what I think the hardest Metallica solo is, the fact that these arpeggios are at least partially alternate picked or 100% alternate picked would definitely make this number one for me. So here we have Damage Inc. And full disclosure, I wanted to use Disposable Heroes for this video too, but I couldn't find a live version that I really liked. With that being said, this solo is probably my second favorite solo off of Master of Puppets. Let's check it out. So I really love this descending line into this like key change portion of the solo. It's a little awkward and difficult to play based on where your pinky lands when you play it. You can hear there a little sloppy, but the idea here is that we've got to F sharp, and I just love how slick that is with that chord change. Let's see where it goes after that. So one thing I definitely don't love about Kirk's playing, and this is something that a lot of people give him a hard time for, is his vibrato. And it's definitely on full display in this version of Damage Inc. You can just hear how he's got sort of this like buzzing bee vibrato that's like crazy fast. I might be exaggerating that a little bit, but me personally, I'm much more of a fan of vibrato that sounds natural, almost as though like someone's singing. If you heard somebody singing and they sounded like this, every time they changed from one note to the next, you'd probably find that like really, really annoying. And I think that Kirk, unfortunately, he's done this his entire career. And it's definitely one of the knocks against him if we're trying to consider him as a good guitar player. But more of a subjective thing, if anything. I'm just not in love with it. Nevertheless, this is still an awesome solo, and I think this is probably it's definitely Kirk's best album from a lead guitar standpoint.
And Justice for All saw Metallica embrace a more progressive sound. The songs became longer, more complex, jumping from time signature to time signature at the drop of a hat. Despite this increase in complexity, I actually think the solos on this record are a bit of a letdown. When compared to Master of Puppets, I think there's a little bit of a drop-off in Kirk's tone and his overall composition of his solos, but there are a few that stand out amongst the rest, one of which being The Shortest Straw.
So here we have my favorite solo from And Justice for All, The Shortest Straw. Let's check it out. So I love that legato descending line in the very beginning. Definitely very unorthodox compared to all of the solos on the first three records. We've got, right, very fast, very difficult, very challenging. But I love the way that it leads into these little harmonics that start on the next measure. Then from there, we've got this is a very common Kirk Hammett lick, but this is definitely my favorite example of this lick. One of Kirk's most overplayed, but here it's really fitting. He does this a lot where he'll do, it's like a descending line on the high E string in E minor, and sometimes he just throws all caution to the wind and sort of just like tries to hit some notes rapidly going down the neck. We'll either hear this, or we'll hear... Both are very, very common, but this is super cool. He's got these like breaks going on underneath that James and Lars and Jason are playing, and he's sort of just rapidly alternate picking them and kind of descends, ascends, descends, ascends. We've got... Right? Pretty cool. Where does it go after that? This chromatic descending line, really awesome as well. I think he's alternate picking that. I'm not totally sure, but I think, or scratch that, hybrid picking that. I don't think it's really possible to alternate pick that. It's so fast, so ridiculously fast. And then we get to my favorite part of the solo. Let's check that out. All right, so this is a whole tone lick. We start with like this E major arpeggio and go through another series or multiple series of major arpeggios here. But this is so drastically different than anything Kirk does ever in the Metallica discography, especially when you play it up to speed. You don't expect that from him. But that's what I really love about this solo, and I think it's kind of a shame that he neglected to build on this sort of thing on future Metallica records. So, unfortunately, what follows the first solo in The Shortest Straw is pretty terrible. It's a pretty big train wreck of a solo. The song's key center here is E minor, or like an E Phrygian kind of vibe. Right? But what Kirk decides to do is solo in G minor. He takes G minor pentatonic straight up and uses that for the basis of this solo, and it's horrendously out of key. I sort of understand why they don't play this part of the song live. He's doing his best Kerry King impression and sort of throws all caution, or rather all keys, to the wind. And that's what we have for the second solo of The Shortest Straw. Not it. Bad. Don't like that.
By and large, the Black Album was most people's introduction to Metallica. I can remember being 11 years old and hearing the solos to The Unforgiven and Enter Sandman for the first time, and at the time, I didn't necessarily think there was anybody who could play those, and that those were probably the greatest solos ever written. As time has gone on, I still really like this album, and I still really like the solos on it. I think they're well-composed solos that enhance each song that they're a part of. My favorite from this record is probably Wherever I May Roam.
So my favorite solo off of the Black Album is Wherever I May Roam. Here is the live version from San Diego in 1992. Let's check this out. So sort of like with Creeping Death, we've got this repetition, but it's sort of an establishment of a theme. Definitely one of Kirk's strong suits as a player. We're sort of in this Phrygian dominant scale thing throughout Wherever I May Roam, but I love that he plays a lick, comes back to it, and continues on the arc of his solo. Let's check out where it goes from here. I love the tapping there. Right, more of that Phrygian dominant Eastern kind of vibe. And then from there, we get into the halftime feel. Let's check that out. The way this solo goes into the halftime feel is so well done. Kirk uses space so well here, and I love how he resolves to this interval. Right, we get that major six in there. In this particular six, we have an F and a D note, which are the third and fifth of the B flat major chord that James is implying underneath. I just love it. Let's check out where it goes after this. Absolutely love that. It's a great example of Kirk using an arc for a solo to sort of tell a story. You've got your beginning section where he's using repetition to create a theme and draw the listener in. Then he goes to more of the technical flair on the through that tapping lick. You get into the halftime feel, and it creates this engagement with the listener where you don't really know where the solo's going, but you're super intrigued with what he's going to do next. And then you get to this really cool double stop ascending lick. Something along those lines. But when you get to that lick, it's basically the peak of the mountain, and you've got from there your ascending, or descending rather, Phrygian dominant. Right? Very cool. Definitely one of my favorite solos from a compositional standpoint that Kirk ever wrote.
Load and Reload saw Metallica cutting their hair and assimilating into the mid-90s stylings of grunge and stoner metal. These two records saw Kirk forego the more intricate stylings of the first 5 Metallica records in favor of a more blues-influenced lead guitar style.
So I have switched to my Strat for some E-flat tuning for Load and Reload, and my favorite solo off of either of those two records is Fuel. Let's check it out. The phrasing after these initial bends is definitely very Slash. I could definitely hear Slash playing something like this. And is definitely something that would fit right in with a Guns N' Roses solo on one of the first 3 records. After that, we get into another one of these thematic concepts that Kirk loves to build on. Let's check that out. So once again, we've got our very Stevie Ray Vaughan, establishing the theme with those intervals, going to a lick, coming back to the theme, back to those intervals, and building the solo from there. Really love this.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Kirk's contributions to Metallica from a rhythm guitar standpoint. Here's a collection of some of my favorite Metallica riffs written by Kirk. I think an important thing in evaluating if Kirk is a good guitar player is taking a look and seeing how he progressed and grew as a musician since Metallica's rise to superstardom in the 90s. When I listen to Kirk's leads on Death Magnetic and Hardwired, I don't necessarily hear him making a great attempt to grow as a lead player. While Kirk's wah habit was sort of in control throughout their heyday, I think he overdoes it a little bit on these 2 records. And also, when you listen to the note choices and the licks that he plays, it's almost hard to discern from one solo to the next. I hate to say that Kirk rested on his laurels of his immense fame and wealth on these 2 records, but when you listen to it, or at least when I listen to it, that's sort of what it sounds like to me. With that being said though, here are some of my favorite solos from Death Magnetic and Hardwired. After evaluating the breadth of Kirk's career as Metallica's lead guitarist, there's certainly a lot to unpack. While he's certainly not a perfect player, Kirk's influence cannot be understated. I would hazard a guess that a fair amount of you probably started playing guitar because you heard the solo in One or Fade to Black or any of the solos that I highlighted earlier in this video. In conclusion, I do think that Kirk is a good guitar player. It's very easy to imagine what Metallica's discography would have sounded like with a different guitar player, but would they really be Metallica without Kirk? If you enjoyed this video, this is the part where I'm going to ask you to like, subscribe, and share. Do you think Kirk is good? Do you think he sucks? Leave a comment down below so that we can discuss. Also, let me know if there's another guitar player you want me to break down to see if they're truly good. Until next time, peace.